but one of his numbers, this is a gun podcast, after all, a gun politics podcast, that have been bad and continue to be bad, even worse than his general approval numbers, are his approval on handling of gun policy. He's down, according to the latest poll from the Associated Press, to just 31% approval on how he's handled guns. And, I wonder how that will stack up. We just talked about the gun politics of the Republican primary. Biden is, I know that there's, there's the one Kennedy is running, and there's stuff with the presidential primary. He's going to be the nominee. I don't think, unless something terrible happens, and he's not, he is very old. I mean, they're all pretty old. Trump's very old too, but he's extremely likely to be the person who runs again. I mean, he will have an incumbent advantage regardless of all this other stuff. But I do wonder how you think that's going to affect his reelection. Like, is this going to be a sore point, or do you think that, I mean, I'm sure part of the reason he has such a low approval rating is that Democrats don't like that he hasn't been able to do more to enact gun control, right?
Right. That's exactly right. This is what happens. This is the politics of failing to set proper expectations. I mean, Biden came into office with the House of Representatives in control of the Republican Party and the Senate almost evenly split. I mean, they picked up one seat by the way, in an election where Republicans were defending, I think, 9 more seats than Democrats were. And they could have actually they could have lost control of the Senate if it hadn't been for the fact that the Republicans nominated some pretty dodgy people for some of those positions. And that actually we can talk about, Trump's role in and what that says about his electoral influence. But that's a little, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to, because I meant to make this point at the time when you were talking about the Jeb Bush Clinton matchup, and nobody wanted to see another Bush Clinton thing. One of the things that works again's Trump in that dynamic too is like, who wants to see another Trump Biden matchup? I don't think most Americans do either.
I mean, I think that's going to be a big issue. It's the only reason I think that they're keeping Biden in place. And just to address something that you said earlier, Kennedy doesn't have a shot at getting the nomination, but if he scores 20-30% in New Hampshire, you might be looking at an LBJ. You might be looking at an LBJ situation where other people look at this, realize that Biden is a disaster in a general election, and start jumping in. This is what happened in 1968. Eugene McCarthy didn't have a shot at getting the nomination in 1968. But when Eugene McCarthy nearly beat LBJ in New Hampshire, suddenly the whole thing opened up and LBJ decided, I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah, I guess we could see something like that.
You still could see something like that, but
you never know. Biden is extremely unpopular at this point.
He's extremely unpopular. And to get back to the gun thing, to get back to his numbers on guns, he came in with having lost the House of Representatives and only barely gaining a seat in a cycle that Democrats really should have gained more in the Senate, and especially when they're winning the presidency. And promised the world, right? Made these ridiculous promises. We're going to pass gun control. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. None of which was possible. And when you set expectations that high, and especially when you're letting the radical extreme of your party run it, as Democrats have done, that you're setting up expectations that cannot possibly be fulfilled. And all you're going to do is make people angry when you fail. And this was the issue around the so-called Build Back Better bill, the $6 trillion, then the $5 trillion, then the $3.5 trillion bill that ended up cut down to $800 billion and recast as the Inflation Reduction Act, which finally passed because Joe Manchin was an idiot or was just a very cynical power player, which I think is the better explanation. So they didn't get anything that they wanted. No, they didn't get a lot of what they wanted, and a lot of what Biden was promising. And the trick in politics is not to overpromise and underdeliver. It's just like any other type of sales. If you overpromise and underdeliver, people are going to be angry with you. And so that reflects both gun owners and conservatives not liking Joe Biden's gun policy, period, as well as progressives who are angry that Joe Biden hasn't done more work to ban assault weapons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, even though it's not really up to Biden in that sense. I mean, you'd have to have one of the two chambers in Congress actually propose it. And it's not going to come out of the House of Representatives. And Chuck Schumer.
It passed last Congress, right? But
it did.
Then the Senate didn't want to take it up because it was 50-50 split.
50-50 Senate, right?
And not only that, they probably couldn't have gotten 50 votes because not all 50 Democrats would have voted for that.
Well, Manchin wasn't going to vote for it. And so it was a dead issue, and Trump was president and he would have vetoed it. I mean, the House passing that bill was simply performative.
I just mean they did that under Biden, right? So the last Congress.
Oh, I see. You mean before
Biden
the midterms.
would have signed it, but the problem and the issue they run into is like you have, and you're right. I think it does go back to expectation setting because, well, we've got a Democratic president who wants an assault weapons ban. We got a House who passed it just barely, like they got it through literally at the exact number of votes needed, and they had 2 Republicans come over to vote for it to get it through, and then you have a Democratic Senate, so you have a lot of Democratic activists and voters who probably think this should be law because you're promising us this. Your party controls everything, but in reality, they still couldn't pass it, even if they had gotten rid of the filibuster, right? They blame the filibuster for a lot of stuff.
Right.
But even if you gotten rid of the filibuster, you still wouldn't have had 50 votes anyway, because there are Democrats who oppose this policy. So yeah, you set up this scenario where you're saying you can get this done. He says this all the time, right? He says, I beat the NRA 30 years ago and got the assault weapons ban passed. We're going to do it again. Well, and then you don't, even though your party has control of everything. And yeah, people on your own side start to get antsy about it. And that's why he's got a 48% disapproval rating on guns from Democrats. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, the other side is Republicans don't want any of that stuff. They don't want him. They don't want an assault weapons ban. And they don't want the other policies that he's pushing for. So he's already going to have really low marks because this issue is very polarized at the moment.
Right.
And so that's how you end up with an approval rating that's even lower than your general approval rating, which is pretty bad to begin with.
Yep. It's exactly right. And again, it goes back to, there's a lot of people in politics who forget this about overpromising and under-delivering. Trump did that to a certain extent too.
Yeah, Trump does do that.
Right. I mean, the wall, Mexico's going to pay. We're going to build the wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then not really doing anything much about it until, repairing the parts of the wall that were already there, extending some of those sections out somewhat. Certainly in the latter stages of the presidency, they were doing more work on the wall than they had been before. But I mean, he had 4 years and he didn't get it done. And that's also one of the things I think that you're going to hear from DeSantis is, well, Donald Trump was promising all these things in 2016, didn't get them done. Why are you going to send him there again when you know that when I tell you something, I get it done?